So we have chosen not to include a particular, very famous scene from the Bacchae. And Emma and I wanted to talk just quickly to contextualize that decision that we made. So Emma, would you mind telling us what usually happens in, or calling sort of the robing scene?
Totally. So the robing of Pentheus occurs a little more than halfway through the play. It comes after a particularly famous choral ode, which is very beautiful. Pentheus emerges from the palace of Thebes dressed in the Maenad's clothing, and Dionysus and he have an exchange where they talk about the particulars of the dress, the particulars of his hair. Pentheus's state of consciousness is somewhat altered during this state. He appears to be hallucinating. He says he can see two suns over the city of Thebes, two sets of 7 gates. And then he looks at Dionysus and sees bull horns and comments on those and seems not in his right mind. The other thing that's very important to note is that Pentheus appears to be enjoying wearing women's clothing. He appears to be getting something out of his outfit, and Dionysus plays on that. And as they slowly start to exit the stage, there's some back and forth between the two of them about what Pentheus plans to do up on the mountain. Dionysus has a lot of lines that have a lot of double meaning, and Pentheus exits. Dionysus turns to the chorus and the audience and indicates that this is not going to go well, and then follows.
Excellent. So how is the scene usually played when folks stage the whole play?
So the thing about the robing is that in a lot of contemporary productions, it's played for comedy. And it's played for comedy in a very specific way, which has a lot of roots in a lot of theatrical traditions, a lot of roots in some problematic trends. But the comedy really stems in the scene from the automatic assumption by a lot of production teams and a lot of theater makers that a, quote, man in a dress is automatically funny. And so a lot of those tropes are played out in that scene in livid color. That interpretation of the scene is also reflected in a lot of scholarship. A lot of scholarship refers to the scene as being explicitly comic and plays off of a lot of, we see this trope in kind of pantomime culture in the UK. We see the kind of the dame who is a comic drag character. And I think as a scholar and as a queer person that this is potentially a harmful trend. There are a lot of people who may be assigned male at birth or lean masculine, who experiment with feminine clothing, who experiment with aspects of their identity that are more aligned with femininity, and that's a very vulnerable and open and tender experience. And to see that on stage played as kind of grotesque comedy could potentially be harmful.
Yeah. Can you talk, I think potentially, I mean, people have come at this with the idea of, would an ancient audience have thought this was comic? And I think some very well-intentioned producers and directors and et cetera come at this from the perspective of an ancient audience, or the majority of an ancient audience, if they would have found this comic, should we not play this for laughs? And I just was wondering if you could talk about that potential objection a little bit.
Yeah, I think the idea of would an ancient audience have anything is a fraught question, because it assumes that ancient identity and ancient thought is a monolith. I talk about this question with friends and family a lot, and kind of the idea of like, well, what did they think at the time? And the answer to that is always, they thought a lot of things.
Like any audience, there are so many people engaging in so many different ways with
if you pull 2 different Athenians off the street and ask them the same question, you're going to get 2 different answers. You're going to, you know, there's a lot of diversity of thought even within the time. I also think that a contemporary understanding of gender and sexuality, while not applicable to ancient audiences and to ancient individuals, can still inform our thinking. And queerness and any kind of experience of gender and non-normative gender and sexuality is not new. And queer people and queer themes and queer motifs have been around and are very well documented and represented in antiquity. Whether or not Euripides is deliberately leaning into those, deliberately playing into those, or whether or not it's was or was not author intended to be funny is a kind of immaterial question.
Yeah, can I,
Diversity of thought. Sorry, go on.
yeah, I just wanted to see if we could dig a little bit more into kind of addressing the how much, if at all, does it matter what Euripides may have intended in this scene? As we are thinking about this as a modern actors and dramaturgs and scholars, does it matter how Euripides intended it to play?
For me personally, in my scholarly, theatrical, academic opinion, no. Death of the author is hard enough with 21st century authors. This is a very enforced death of the author. What we have is what we have, and trying to kind of divine his intentions or opinions or desires when we don't even have stage directions for these plays. We have this, and this play in particular is, you know, it wasn't performed during his lifetime. He wrote it in exile. He died before it was even performed. His son had to bring it back to Greece. It's, to me, what we make of it and what it means to each individual reader, listener, viewer is so much more important than what one guy maybe was thinking 2,500 years ago.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for that. I just wanted to sort of explicitly get those ideas out about how much it matters, you know, trying to recreate the ancient view or the ancient experience there, as opposed to the meaning that we're making in this moment out of this play. And then I guess just finally, I wanted to talk about, you and I had discussed a little bit kind of the violence in this scene and our choices about the potential for this to be a very kind of meaningful, liberating scene to think about performativity and drag and clothing and identity, as opposed to the reasons that we decided to exclude this scene and why we want to maybe keep this a little bit at a distance from this particular event that's going on here.
This scene in particular is a scene that very powerfully defies being categorized as harmful or helpful. This is a scene that just has a lot of power. And given the constraints of this competition and given the time that people are going to be allotted, this is something that might need more time and care to produce something that takes care of the audience and the performers. That's the other thing that's really important to keep in mind here is this is a very violent scene, and not in the sense that we get later in the play off stage. There's no blood shed in this moment. Nobody's in physical pain, but Pentheus's consent and autonomy are being really upsettingly violated in this scene. This is a man who, or this is a person who is having desires of his, having thoughts that he maybe has always had or hasn't wanted to really admit, having them right out in the open, is being led to his death, doesn't know, and thinks it's his own idea and that it's a great idea, and is being made to think things that he wouldn't otherwise be doing, and to his harm in an extremely vulnerable place. And that kind of mental and emotional violence and that kind of violation of consent is an act of violence. What Dionysus is doing in this moment is equally an act of violence as when Pentheus actually dies. And that is very rough territory. And it's not only rough territory for scholars, it's rough territory for actors. From personal experience, I have been involved with productions of this play, and I have been in rehearsal rooms where this scene is being performed, and you really need to be careful. The actor playing Pentheus needs to be comfortable. The actor playing Pentheus needs to be given access to resources for if they touch into an emotional place that's hard, they can come back from it easily. The actor playing Dionysus needs to be very, very careful. particularly when it comes to like, if there's any kind of physical contact, you need to be very careful about like how you touch each other. If you touch each other, people need to be able to opt out at any time they want, because this scene, underneath this kind of very seemingly light conversation about like hair and how is the dress hanging, and oh my gosh, we're so excited to go up to the mountain, it's going to be so cool. You know, like Pentheus is, you know, having these kind of fantasies about what he might be seeing up on the mountain. And underneath all of that is this really awful nest of hurt and anger and exposed intimacy. And it's just something where a lot of care is needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in conjunction with this video, I think we'll put together some resources. So for people who are interested in exploring this scene as a text and thinking about some of the issues, it is, to Emma's point, this is a really powerful, complex, and it is a scene that just requires more care than we think we can ask people to take in this context, that we can provide those resources. But I think we will put together some additional readings and some additional content for people who are maybe interested in carefully and really just emphasize with a great deal of care, thinking about the implications of this scene, which can be in a lot of ways very, I think, powerful and can be very triggering as well for a lot of people who are engaged in it. So Emma, are there other things that you wanted to mention about the scene?
Yeah, I think the other thing that I think is worth mentioning for this scene, even if you're not performing it, even if you're just reading it, is despite the fact that Pentheus's consent and autonomy are being violated in this moment, and that this is maybe not the moment in his life where he would have chosen to do this, consider his reaction to what he has done. Consider his reaction to how he feels in his body and how he feels in these new clothes, and the attention that he pays to how he stands, how his hair is, and the joy that he takes in that. I think that that's an extraordinarily tender and soft and gentle thing to be put on stage, and it is surrounded by violence and it does kill him. But this is one of the most kind of naked emotions that modern queer people can experience, of having this moment where you change something about you and then that feels right. This feels good. This feels like me. I feel more like me. And that is beautiful and wonderful. And then the fact that it is used in the play for this purpose is horrifying. And that's something to keep in mind. Yeah, that's what I got.
Well, thank you. I think, I think this gives us all a lot of good context for, and for any students and teachers and anyone, like I said, there'll be a lot of additional resources. And I know Emma and I would be happy to talk to anyone in greater detail if folks are interested in either in thinking about staging the scene in their own classroom context. This is not a scene that we think should not be staged, but a scene that has so many emotional layers that, if this is something, please, we would love to chat with y'all more about it.
Absolutely.